Ryu Minjae was already moving before anyone understood what had happened. 1 second, he was standing at the altar beneath a ceiling of glittering chandeliers, the son of the most feared syndicate family in Gyeongnam City, groomed to marry Park Hana, political jewel of the Park clan. The next second, he lunged forward, grabbing his vibrating phone off the velvet tray before the best man could silence it. "Sir, you can't," someone whispered harshly behind him. But Minjae didn't hear anything except his own blood roaring in his ears. The screen displayed a number he didn't recognize, but the words flashing across the top stopped his breath. Gyeongnam General Hospital. He pressed answer. "Who is this?" A nurse's voice, crisp and urgent, cut through the noise of the wedding crowd. "Is this Ryu Minjae?" "Yes. This call concerns a patient named Naomi Adeyemi. She collapsed outside our emergency ward. She is 8 months pregnant and listed you as her emergency contact. Sir, her condition is critical." The world stilled. He didn't breathe. He didn't blink. He didn't think. Naomi? 8 months pregnant? Pregnant, with his child? Someone behind him said his name, soft and confused, Park Hana. Someone else barked for security as gasps rippled through the hall. But Minjae was already running, shoving past stunned guests, ignoring photographers who snapped wildly as the heir of the Ryu syndicate fled his own wedding. Naomi. 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 His shoes struck the marble floor like gunshots echoing in his skull. A guard reached for him, but Minjae dodged, racing down the aisle covered in thousands of imported white roses, flowers chosen for a union he no longer gave a damn about. He burst through the doors and into the courtyard, voice cracking. "Get the car. Now." The chauffeur scrambled to pull the black sedan forward. Minjae didn't wait. He yanked the door open, slammed it shut, and barked, "Hospital. Full speed. Anyone follows us, lose them." The car lurched forward, tires screeching as wedding guests spilled outside behind him, shouting his name. But he didn't look back. Because all he could see was Naomi's face the last time he held her. The pain in her eyes as she walked away from him. The way he let her go because he was too cowardly to cut ties with his family. And now she was fighting for her life. And the life of the child he didn't even know existed. If you were in his place, torn between family power and the woman you loved, what would you choose? And what would you regret for the rest of your life? Before the story continues, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if your past came crashing into your future like this? Now, let's go back to the story. Inside the speeding car, Minjae pressed his shaking hand against his mouth, trying to steady his breathing. "Naomi, why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked in the dim interior. "Why didn't you call me?" But a deeper, darker voice inside him whispered the truth. "She tried. He was the one who made it impossible." The car wove through traffic, horns blaring as drivers swerved out of the way. The chauffeur's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Sir," he stammered, "your parents." "Keep driving," Minjae snapped. "Don't say their names." But the chauffeur didn't need to. The consequences of what Minjae had just done were already spiraling in his mind. Abandoning a wedding arranged to unite 2 mafia clans meant war. It meant disgrace. It meant punishment. But none of it mattered. Not compared to Naomi. He leaned back, closing his eyes, forcing himself to picture her the way she used to be, her warm smile, her bright eyes, her fierce intelligence that fascinated him from the moment they met. A memory struck him so vividly he could smell the coffee in the room. Naomi standing in front of him during their first negotiation class, fearless and unimpressed by his arrogance. "You assume power is enough," she'd said, her tone calm but cutting. "But language is power. Culture is power. And you don't understand either." No one talked to him like that. No one challenged him the way she did. That was the moment he fell, though he didn't realize it until much later. The car made a sharp turn. Tires screeched. "Almost there, sir," the chauffeur yelled. Minjae's heart hammered against his ribs so violently it hurt. He stared at his hands, hands that once held Naomi gently, hands that once promised things he never had the courage to deliver. The hospital came into view, its bright red emergency sign cutting through the early evening fog. The car hadn't even stopped when Minjae threw the door open and sprinted toward the entrance. People shouted behind him. Security tried to stop him. But nothing could slow him down. He burst into the emergency ward, chest heaving. "Naomi Adeyemi. Where is she?" A nurse looked up, startled. "Sir, you're her contact?" "Follow me." He followed her past curtained rooms, past the sounds of beeping machines and rushing footsteps. Every second felt like a knife carving into him. They stopped at a door. The nurse turned, face tight. She's unconscious. Blood pressure dangerously high. We're preparing for a possible emergency C-section, but the baby is premature, and she's refusing consent until... Until what? His voice trembled. Until she sees you. For a moment, the world blurred. He grabbed the doorframe, breath leaving him in a broken exhale. She asked, for me? Yes, the nurse said gently. She's been asking for you since she woke up the first time. His throat tightened. He pushed the door open. Inside, Naomi lay on the bed, pale, sweating, breathing shallowly. Machines beeped erratically around her. Her head turned slowly at the sound of the door. And when her eyes met his, filled with pain, fear, and something he didn't deserve. His heart shattered. Min-jae, she whispered, voice barely audible. He rushed to her side, taking her trembling hand. I'm here. I'm here, Naomi. I'm not going anywhere. Tears welled in her eyes. You left me. I'm sorry, he choked. I'm so sorry. I'll explain everything, but not now. Right now, I need you to stay with me. Please. Please don't leave me again. Her hand squeezed his weakly. I didn't want to do this alone. You're not alone anymore, he whispered. I promise. Her lips trembled as pain shot through her body. Alarms beeped faster. Doctors rushed in. Sir, we need her consent. Now. Naomi looked up at him, breath ragged. If I let them take the baby, will you stay? Will you protect her? Will you protect us? I swear it, he said, voice breaking. I choose you, Naomi. I choose our child. I won't run again. Her eyes closed as a single tear slid down her cheek. Okay, she whispered. Do it. The doctors moved instantly. And Min-jae held her hand until they wheeled her away. The operating room swallowed Naomi whole, bright, sterile, a hive of motion. Min-jae stood in the corridor like a statue, fingers pressed to his temples, watching through the small glass window as nurses and surgeons moved with machine precision. The world had narrowed to the sound of his heart and the distant whir of the ventilator. Time lost its edges. Doctors emerged to explain in clipped sentences, maternal hemorrhage risk, preeclampsia complications, likelihood of premature birth. Min-jae nodded at phrases he barely heard. He had never felt smaller and bigger at the same time, smaller because he had no control over the one life that mattered most, bigger because he could feel the weight of choice, of consequence, heavy on his shoulders. He replayed everything he'd done that led here. How he chose the family's safety over Naomi months ago. How secret meetings and hushed phone calls became a prison for the very love he kept in the dark. How Park Hannah's smiles in public were a lie he helped perform. He could see Naomi's leaving, her back turning, suitcase in hand, rain on the airport pavement, and in that slow-motion memory, he could see himself hesitating, thinking of his father's voice, of the syndicate's rules. He had been a man who loved from a distance. Now distance was impossible. Minutes felt like hours. A surgeon stepped out, scrubbed and solemn. Mr. Ryu, he said quietly. The baby has been delivered. She's small, but she's fighting. We've taken Naomi to ICU. You can see them soon. Min-jae's legs buckled as though a trapdoor had opened beneath him. Doctors guided him to a chair and placed a paper cup of tepid coffee in his hands he barely tasted. He could not cry, not properly, not with the silence of the corridor pressing in, but his breath was hitched with something raw. Then grandmother Ryu arrived. She didn't storm in like the rest of the family might have. She walked in with a slow dignified step, supported by a cane, eyes red-rimmed but clear. Everyone in the corridor recognized the weight of her presence. The room seemed to exhale. Even the nurses looked away with reverence. Min-jae didn't know if relief or dread hit first. Grandmother Ryu met his gaze, and there was no condemnation, only a deep, hard compassion. She sat beside him, her hand folding over his in a gesture that felt like an anchor. You chose a hard road, she said softly. But a brave one. You did right by her. He choked on a laugh that was closer to a sob. Grandmother. Don't call me that now. Call me Halmiani, call me what you will, but remember, power that does not protect life is worthless. Her voice carried the sort of authority that had kept their family's inner circle in line for decades. Min-jae had grown up obeying it, fearing it. That day, he felt it wrap around him like a cloak he could finally wear for good. Before he could answer, the corridor doors burst open and his parents arrived like a storm. Madame Ryu's face was a mask of fury, every line sharpened. Ryu Sang-ho's jaw was a hard slab of granite. When he looked at Min-jae, it was not the look of a father who had come to thank a son for saving a life. It was the look of a man betrayed. Min-jae, his mother hissed. What have you done? Do you have any idea what this will mean? Mother, he began, voice steadying because he could not afford to break in front of them. You've ruined us, his father cut in. You walked out on the marriage. You jeopardized the Park Alliance. Do you understand the consequences? Do you think Naomi's child can secure anything for our family? She is a teacher. Not one of our kind. Min-jae's fingers tightened around his paper cup until it crumpled. He kept his voice low and deliberate. I know what I did. I chose to save a life. I chose my child. I chose Naomi. You chose disgrace, his mother spat. You chose exile. Grandmother Ryu lifted a hand, and for a moment there was silence sharp enough to cut. Enough, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. Blood ties do not make men good. It is choices that do. Min-jae has chosen. We will not force him to unchoose. Madame Ryu's lips thinned into a line so tight the skin around her eyes pulled. You would protect this outsider? I would protect life, Halmiani said. And by doing so, I protect the family's honor in a different way. We are known for power. Let us be known for protecting those we can. The argument widened, tempers flared, and the corridor became a battlefield of words. Nurses averted their eyes, used to violence in different forms but not this kind of public family fracture. Min-jae felt hollowed, his father's words had landed like blows, but something else had shifted. Grandmother Ryu's support was not mere sentiment, it was leverage. Her quiet defiance was a crack in the wall his parents had built. Hours later, Min-jae was led into the ICU where Naomi rested. She looked like a ghost of herself, pale and exhausted, a halo of 4 tubes and monitors beeping a slow rhythm. And by her side, in a small incubator, lay their daughter, tiny, wrinkled, a mouth that puckered and unfurled like a stubborn blossom. Min-jae's breath hitched. He moved to the incubator first, hands hovering but not touching the glass. The nurses wore a look of stern kindness and a tiny victory in their eyes. She's a fighter, one of them said. She weighs less than a newborn should, but her vitals are stable. He stared at the smallness of the child and felt an avalanche of things: responsibility, love, terror, and odd, unfettered joy. What will we name her? A nurse asked quietly. Min-jae's eyes stung. G. Naomi, he said without thinking, the syllable a blend, his world and hers. The nurse smiled, and for the first time in days, Min-jae let a small, disbelieving relief settle into his chest. At Naomi's bedside, he took her hand. Her skin was cool, her pulse faint but steady. Her face twisted with the remnants of pain as she stirred. You gave her a name, she whispered, the word little and fierce. You always choose my name as if it were a prayer. I promise to keep her, he said. I promise to keep you. Her eyes shone with a tired humor. You better. You broke your wedding vows today. You have a lot to prove. He smiled then, a painful, broken smile, and kissed her forehead. I will prove it. News of the birth rippled through the family and the syndicate like a shockwave. Some of the inner circle were furious, others were quietly relieved. Rumors began to sprout, about deals broken, alliances ruptured, a son who turned his back on a legacy. Min-jae knew the world he had stepped away from would not let go easily. There would be threats. There would be bribes and blackmail and the soft knife of isolation. But as he sat there, watching Naomi sleep, watching his daughter's tiny chest rise and fall, he also felt the seed of a new life germinating, one that had nothing to do with ledgers or alliances, with power plays or newspaper headlines. It was a life of names, of breakfasts in small sunlit kitchens, of quick arguments over baby clothes, of laughter that didn't hide knives. He thought of Makori, of the dusty, relentless warmth of Naomi's hometown, of the markets that tasted like spice and song. He imagined a small apartment there, sunlight through cheap curtains, children running on tile floors, an honest way to make a living without blood tied to every contract. But the syndicate would not stand idle. Within hours, emissaries sent by Madame Ryu began to place financial straitjackets on him, accounts frozen, property claims challenged, his position within the syndicate stripped in a formal meeting he refused to attend. They hoped to starve him out, to force Naomi and the child to return to a life of precariousness he could then exploit. Min-jae welcomed their threats with a calm that surprised even him. Take it, he told one of the emissaries who came to the hospital with a stack of documents. I prefer being poor and free than rich and chained. The emissary's eyes flicked to Naomi's face, softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened. That's your choice, Mr. Ryu, he said. Just know the world you left will not be kind. Min-jae folded his hands, feeling the weight of the choice. He thought of Naomi's leaving months ago, the painful dignity that had carried her across oceans, and he realized something. The hard part wasn't leaving the syndicate. The hard part was making sure Naomi never had to face the same coldness again. He would build a life for them. He would start small, maybe a consulting firm that taught people how to negotiate honestly, that bridged the worlds Naomi and he inhabited. It would be messy. It would be risky. It would be honest. As dusk slipped into night, he sat between two beacons of his life, Naomi sleeping under a thin hospital blanket, their daughter under glass, small breaths making the world seem both fragile and infinite. The corridor outside hummed with the distant life of a city that had no idea it had just lost its air. And for the first time in a long time, Ryu Min-jae felt like the man he wanted to be, terrified, accountable, but entirely his own. If you're rooting for Min-jae and Naomi, tap the like button. And tell us in the comments, would you leave everything for love, or would you protect your family's legacy at all costs? Your answer might surprise you. Days passed in a blur of sleepless breaths and frantic hope. Naomi drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling Min-jae's name, sometimes reaching weakly for a child she hadn't yet held. Their daughter, tiny, fierce, wrapped in tubes and determination, remained in NICU, fighting with every breath. Nurses spoke gently of milestones and setbacks, of the fragile math of premature life. But the greatest storm waited just outside the hospital walls. The Ryu syndicate did not take betrayal quietly. By the fourth day, the storm found him. Min-jae had just stepped out of Naomi's room when a familiar figure blocked the corridor. It was Ryu Sang-ho's right-hand man, Kang Dae-hyun, a man who had cleaned more syndicate messes than anyone dared count. He wasn't here for congratulations. He stood tall in a charcoal suit that seemed to swallow light. Mr. Ryu, he said. Or should I say, former Mr. Ryu. Min-jae straightened. If you're here to threaten Naomi, don't bother. I won't let you near her. Dae-hyun's expression softened, surprisingly. Not kind, just less sharp. I'm not here for her. Your father sent me to deliver terms. I'm not interested. You should be. I'm not. Dae-hyun sighed, almost pitying. Min-jae. You walked out of a political wedding. You abandoned an alliance that took two clans 12 years to negotiate. Your parents are calling emergency meetings with every partner the family has. Do you understand the magnitude of what you've done? Min-jae's jaw clenched. Yes. And I stand by it. Dae-hyun stepped closer, voice low. Your accounts are frozen. Your apartment swept. Your cars reassigned. Even the office you once used has a new occupant as of this morning. I don't need any of it. What about her? And the child? They will. That's my concern, not yours. Not theirs. Dae-hyun studied him for a long moment. You know your father isn't the type to simply cut you off. He wants something from you. I know. He wants you to sign a document acknowledging that the child is not yours. Min-jae inhaled sharply. Absolutely not. And that Naomi acted alone, attempting to trap the family for money. His eyes burned with fury. Get out. Min-jae. Get out. Dae-hyun didn't flinch. I'll tell them you refused. Just know, they will escalate. I expect nothing less. Dae-hyun hesitated before turning. For what it's worth. I hope your child survives. Someone like you might finally do something useful with fatherhood. He walked away. Min-jae exhaled shakily and sank onto a bench, running a hand through his hair. His family would stop at nothing, ruin, manipulation, lies. They had built an empire pulling strings, and he had been one of those strings. Now he was cutting himself free. Later that night, Naomi woke. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, confused at first, then sharpening when she saw him slumped in the chair beside her, chin on his chest, exhausted. She reached out with a trembling hand, brushing his sleeve. He jerked awake instantly. Naomi. You're awake. Her voice was faint. Where's our baby? He stood and gently fixed her pillows. In the NICU. She's small, but she's strong. She's really strong. Naomi swallowed hard. I want to see her. They're preparing to move her later. As soon as they allow it, I'll wheel you there myself. She nodded, closing her eyes briefly. But then, you shouldn't be here. His chest tightened. Why would you say that? Your family, she whispered, your world, they'll destroy you for this. He took her hand firmly. Naomi, listen to me. I don't care about the Ryu Syndicate. I don't care about alliances. I don't care about Park Hannah. I care about you. And I care about our daughter. That's all. She looked away, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Naomi, what's wrong? You say that now, she murmured. But I've seen what your world does to people. I've seen how it changes you. I don't want our daughter anywhere near it. I don't want her growing up with fear. Then she won't, he said immediately. I promise you that. Promises, she whispered brokenly, were what hurt me last time. He sat on the edge of her bed. His voice softened. I know. I failed you. I didn't protect you. I didn't choose you when I should have. I let my family dictate everything. And I will regret that for the rest of my life, but I'm here now. And I'm not leaving. Her lips trembled. I didn't leave you because I stopped loving you. I left because I couldn't bear being hidden like a shameful secret. I know, he said. And I hated myself for making you feel that way. And then I found out I was pregnant. Her voice cracked. I wanted to tell you. I wrote the message 100 times. But every time, I imagined your mother's face. Your father's voice. Your future being destroyed because of me. And I couldn't be the one to ruin your life. He blinked rapidly, fighting tears. You didn't ruin anything. You gave me a life I didn't think I deserved. Silence stretched between them, a soft, painful, hopeful silence. Finally, Naomi whispered, tell me about her. Our daughter. A small smile lifted his mouth. She's tiny. Really tiny. But she's loud when she cries. And she has your nose. Naomi laughed softly, then winced. I want to see her. You will, he promised, kissing her forehead. Tonight. As if on cue, a nurse entered. Mr. Ryu? Naomi? The baby's stable enough for her mother to see her for a few minutes. Naomi's eyes filled anew. Minutes later, Min-jae pushed her wheelchair through the softly lit NICU. Machines hummed, nurses whispered, and the air felt reverent. When they reached the small incubator labeled Baby Adeyemi Ryu, Naomi's breath caught. She reached out to touch the plexiglass. She's beautiful. She is, Min-jae whispered. Just like you. Naomi cried openly now, tears of fear, love, relief, and all the unspoken regrets between them. Min-jae knelt beside her. Naomi. I don't know how we're going to do this. I don't know how to build a life from scratch. But I know I want to do it with you. I want us to be a family. She stared at him, her eyes deep pools of exhaustion and hope. Then stay, she whispered. Stay for real this time. He held her hand. I'm not going anywhere. If you were Naomi, would you trust him again after everything he put her through? Tell us in the comments, your perspective matters more than you think. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you're still here with them in this moment. He kept his promise in small, stubborn ways, staying through the nights, learning the rhythm of feeds and monitors, sitting through rounds when he would have once demanded to see businessmen. The corridor outside Naomi's room grew into an odd kind of camp, Min-jae, tired but resolute, nurses who'd grown fond of his clumsy kindnesses, and a scattering of quiet visitors, friends from Naomi's life who arrived cautiously, holding gifts from Makori and whispered prayers. Word of the baby's birth had traveled fast. Some in the Ryu inner circle sent curt messages, cold threats couched in business language. Others didn't dare show their faces. A handful of outsiders, traders and teachers from Naomi's past who had moved to Gyeongnam City, arrived with warmth and cautious relief, bringing fruits and well-worn blankets that smelled like home. Naomi seemed to brighten in their company. Each visitor was a reminder of a life beyond syndicate walls. But power does not relent easily. Within days, Min-jae felt the pressure of his family's displeasure in concrete ways. Bank accounts were inaccessible. Legal teams arrived at his apartment to change locks and transfer assets. His name was scrubbed from company directories. Even his phone, once filled with favors and appointments, began receiving fewer calls, fewer invitations. It was, he realized with a strange, bitter clarity, the social equivalent of exile. Late one night, as Naomi slept with an oxygen mask tucked at her cheek, Min-jae received a call from an unfamiliar number. He answered warily. Mr. Ryu, a smooth voice said. This is Park Hannah. His throat tightened. He listened as her words came careful, rehearsed. I know what you've done. I know what you've chosen. This is not a conversation to enlist threats. I'm here to offer a choice, one last time. He pictured her in a silk dress, smiling for photos, representing an alliance that strategic marriages had sealed. Her image felt like a scar. What choice, he asked. To step away. To sign statements that distance yourself from the Ryu name. For the baby's safety. For Naomi's. The Park family has leverage, financial and otherwise. We can guarantee a life of comfort if you comply. We can make your life bearable. Min Jae's laugh was short and humorless. You offer a gilded cage. I offer security, Park Hannah said. And I offer your child a future without being used as a symbol in political games. Min Jae's fingers tightened on the phone. My child will not be used as a bargaining chip. Even if that means starting with nothing. There was a pause, and then Park Hannah's voice softened. That's noble. But naive. Consider what you're risking. I only want what's best for everyone. Your best, he said quietly, is built on the suffering of others. She didn't respond. When she did, it was cool, we'll be in touch. The line went dead. He held the phone for a long time, listening to the faint hiss of the connection, then tucked it away. He thought of Naomi's sleeping face and the tiny, relentless breaths from the incubator down the hall. He would not let anyone reduce them to pawns. Days blurred into weeks. Naomi recovered slowly, strength returning in fits and starts. Their daughter, Ji Naomi, a name he had chosen in a moment of raw emotion, grew stubborn and fierce, each hour a small victory. Nurses talked of milestones, weight gain, steady oxygen levels, fingers that curled around a tiny finger like anchors. Each update felt like praise for a battle they hadn't chosen but were determined to win. Friendship within the hospital seeded something else, an offer from an unexpected quarter. A woman named Seo Yuna, a midwife turned community health advocate who had known Naomi in passing through Macquarie's diaspora circles, approached Min Jae one afternoon. You're planning to leave, aren't you? Yuna asked bluntly, sipping tea in the hospital's small visitors' lounge. He blinked. We haven't made concrete plans. Then listen, she said. There are grants, small investors who fund community initiatives. Naomi's skills, teaching, negotiation, cross-cultural communication, could be packaged into a real consultancy. Teach companies to respect language and culture. Help Korean firms reach African markets without acting like conquerors. There's demand. And it's respectable. Min Jae considered this, the way hope sometimes arrived in practical forms rather than declarations. It would mean starting from scratch, he said. It would mean starting honestly, Yuna replied. And if you're serious about leaving that other life, it's the kind of beginning that sticks. He looked at Naomi, sleeping softly in the bed, cheeks hollowed but peaceful. He imagined an office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a sign that didn't bear his family's name, a small team of people building something ethical, messy, true. He thought of Macquarie, of fragrant street food carts and the relentless laughter of children, and of teaching boards and negotiation rooms where Naomi's voice would lead instead of being hushed. Yes, he said finally. We'll do it. We'll build it from here. Yuna smiled. Good. Don't let anyone tell you can't make a new path. There were practicalities to handle. Naomi needed time to heal fully, the baby needed to grow stronger. The syndicate's blows didn't stop because of good intentions. A legal team arranged by Madame Ryu filed motions that complicated any sale of property Min Jae might attempt. They tied his hands in bureaucracy, another form of pressure designed to break him. Still, small victories came. A local clinic in Macquarie pledged to connect Naomi with resources if they returned. A former colleague of Min Jae's arranged a small loan from an anonymous source sympathetic to the idea of cross-cultural consultancy. Money was tight, but it was theirs to spend as they chose. One evening, as rain pelted the hospital windows and the city lights blurred, Min Jae sat beside Naomi, reading to her from a battered novel she'd loved in English class. She listened, half awake, a smile flickering on her lips. You read terribly, she murmured. But you listen well, he replied. She turned to him, eyes unguarded. Promise me something. Anything. That if we leave, we do it together. No secrets. No hidden meetings. No pretending. If we're going to have a family, we need to build it where we can be honest. He took her hand, the same one he'd held in the operating room when life itself was fragile. I promise, he said. She laughed softly. You have to understand, Min Jae, my life isn't built on titles. I don't care about the Ryu name. I care about safety. I care about the world my child will grow into. If you keep them apart, they'll never know warmth without strings. He gazed at her with a clarity that felt new. Then Macquarie is where we'll go. We'll start small. We'll teach. We'll grow. We'll be free. Days later, the hospital permitted Naomi to be discharged. The NICU released Ji Naomi into their arms with a bundle of instructions and a promise: keep her warm, come back for checkups, and never hesitate if things seemed wrong. They left the hospital together, a tiny family balanced on courage and brittle hope. But the world outside had not forgiven him. Madame Ryu arranged a meeting the next morning, summoned not to the Grand Syndicate Hall but to a neutral room with smooth stone floors and a long table. She did not come alone. Ryu Sangho sat at the head like a judge. Around them were advisors, emissaries, and silent witnesses, people who had spent years making deals in shadows. Min-jae entered with Naomi beside him, their daughter in a carrier across Naomi's chest. The sight drew gasps and low murmurs. "You chose this," Madame Ryu said, her voice controlled and cold. "You humiliated the family. You caused instability. You owe the Ryu legacy an explanation." Min-jae swallowed the fear like bile but stood straight. "I saved a life. I brought my daughter into the world. I chose family, my true family, not an alliance constructed by blood and calculation." Madame Ryu's eyes narrowed. "You speak as if you are some moral beacon. You are a weak man who let love cloud reason." "I am a father," he said simply. "Nothing else matters." There was a long silence. Then Sangho leaned forward. "We will not allow this foolishness to endanger our operations. We are offering you one final choice," he said slowly. "Return to your duties. Publicly annul your claim of paternity. Marry Park Hannah as planned. We will arrange a comfortable life for Naomi and the child somewhere far from here." Naomi's grip on the carrier tightened. She met his eyes, searching. Min-jae felt something cold and fierce ignite inside him. He thought of Naomi's solitude at the airport, of how she'd carried her secret across oceans, of the way she'd refused to become a bargaining chip. He thought of little G Naomi's mouth, the small fists that had already refused to give in. "No," he said, voice steady and louder than he expected. Madame Ryu's lips curled. "So be it. Then know this," Min-jae said, feeling a new kind of courage rise. "We will leave. We will start small. I will not take money tainted with coercion or lies. We will build our own way. You can try to break me, but you cannot take my family from me." The room erupted into a flurry of threats and legalistic disclaimers. But Halmione, the grandmother, gave him a look of approval that felt like a benediction. Outside, as they walked away from the building that had been a second skin to him for decades, Naomi rested her head briefly on his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. He kissed her hair. "We did it. If you think Min-jae is a fool for walking away, or a hero, tell us below. Do you believe someone can truly leave a life built on power and rebuild honestly? Hit like if you're rooting for them." Leaving the syndicate compound was easier than leaving the life attached to it. Min-jae felt the weight of eyes on him as he carried the small suitcase that held the last remnants of his old world. Naomi walked beside him, balancing G Naomi's carrier, her lips pressed tight in concentration. The air outside was colder than he expected, maybe the city itself sensed the shift, the quiet rebellion that followed them like a shadow. Their plan was simple because it had to be, move into a small, temporary rental near the harbor while preparing documents to leave for Macquarie. Yuna helped them navigate forms, passports, and healthcare transfers for the baby. But simple did not mean easy. Some mornings, Naomi woke shaking, memories of her collapse haunting her dreams. Other mornings, G Naomi struggled to breathe evenly, sending panic lancing through their hearts. The hospital visits continued. Bills piled up. And without access to his accounts, Min-jae found himself holding his breath whenever he checked their dwindling cash. Yet despite it all, something new took root. Something small and fierce and hopeful. The first night in the rental, Naomi fed their daughter under the dim yellow lamp beside the bed. Min-jae leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a quiet wonder that softened the tired lines of his face. Naomi noticed and smiled faintly. "I didn't imagine this," she said. "Not like this. Not us in a tiny room with peeling paint and a heater that barely works." He stepped closer, brushing a thumb over G Naomi's small hand. "Neither did I. But I imagined something worse." "What's worse than this?" she asked, half amused, half exhausted. "Me without you," he whispered. She paused, then leaned into him, letting her head rest against his chest. "We're not out of danger yet," she murmured. "Your family won't let you walk away so easily." "I know," he said. "But they can't reach us forever." "Maybe not forever," she said. "But long enough to make life difficult." "We'll endure it," he said. "We've endured worse." She lifted her gaze. "Have we?" He kissed her forehead. "I have." She looked at him for a long time, searching his eyes as though looking for something she feared he hadn't yet found. After a moment, she nodded and whispered, "Then let's endure together." The next weeks became a rhythm, Naomi recovering, the baby growing stronger, and Min-jae meeting discreetly with people who could help them slip out of Jiangnam City without interference. The Ryu syndicate didn't operate like the police. They used favors, social leverage, blacklists. But their reach was long. As the days lengthened, so did the warnings. A note slipped under their door. We know where you are. A message through an anonymous number. Come home, or consequences escalate. A driver slowed near the rental one evening, his window lowering just enough for the glint of a camera lens. Not a paparazzo. Someone worse. Naomi stiffened behind the curtain. They're watching. I know, Min-jae said, jaw clenched. But they won't act. Not while Halmione is on our side. Are you sure? No, he admitted. But I believe she'll protect us in whatever ways she can. And if she can't? Then we'll protect ourselves. One night, Naomi sat rocking Naomi near the window, humming a low melody from her childhood, a song from Macquarie that wrapped the room in a warmth the heater never could. Min-jae listened from the tiny kitchenette, preparing formula with the seriousness of someone handling explosives. When Naomi finished the song, she looked at him over the baby's head. You're different, she said. How? Softer. More honest. He set the bottle down. Do you like it? She considered him. I think I'm learning to trust it. He pulled out a folder, placing it beside her. I've been sketching plans, he said. For the business. A consultancy. We'll start small, translation services, negotiation training, cultural seminars. Companies are hungry for access to African markets. And Macquarie businesses want access to Korea too. We could bridge that. She flipped through the pages, his messy notes, her old curriculum, testimonials from former colleagues. Her eyes softened. This is good. Really good. It's ours, he said. Not the syndicate's. Not my father's. Ours. Naomi took a shaky breath, overwhelmed. I want this, she whispered. I want a life where I can teach again. Where our daughter can grow without fear. Then that's where we're heading. He kissed her gently, their daughter squirming between them. I'm proud of you, Min-jae, she murmured. I didn't think you'd ever walk away. I'm proud of you too, he said. You carried this alone for months. You fought for our baby's life. You fought for your own. You're the strongest person I know. She looked down at Naomi, tears brimming. I just wanted her to have better. And she will, he vowed. But the path to better twisted sharply 2 days later. A knock at the door, firm and authoritative. Min-jae tensed. Stay behind me, he murmured to Naomi as he moved toward the entrance. He opened the door to find a familiar figure, Madame Ryu. Not flanked by guards. Not dressed in power. Just a woman in a dark coat, her hair pinned back, eyes sharp but tired. Naomi froze, holding their daughter close. Madame Ryu stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. It seems you intend to leave the country, she said. Is that correct? Min-jae squared his shoulders. Yes. You truly plan to abandon your birthright, she continued, glancing around the small living space as though the cramped walls offended her. I'm building a new one. She turned slowly to face him, her voice still like ice. What do you think will happen when you leave? Do you imagine the world outside Korea will welcome you? That Macquarie will offer you protection from syndicate consequences? I'm not seeking protection, he replied. Just freedom. Freedom, she repeated. Freedom is expensive. And you cannot afford it. We'll find a way. Her gaze flicked briefly to Naomi, as if assessing her again. This woman has made you foolish. Naomi stiffened. I didn't make him anything. He chose truth. And truth is weakness, Madame Ryu snapped. No, Naomi said quietly. Truth is humanity. The older woman stared at her, truly stared, as if seeing her for the first time. Something unreadable passed through her expression before she looked away. Your father is preparing a final action, she said. You should prepare as well. A cold wave rolled down Min-jae's spine. What action? Whether you stay or leave, you will no longer be Ryu Min-jae in the eyes of the family. You will be erased. I don't need the name. Good, Madame Ryu said. Because it will no longer exist for you. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. Your grandmother is the only reason nothing worse has happened. When she dies, no one will restrain him. She opened the door, then added softly, almost too quietly to hear. Take the child far from here. Farther than your father can reach. And then she left. Naomi exhaled shakily. She warned us. Min-jae nodded. We need to leave sooner than planned. How soon? As soon as I can buy 2 new identities and a plane ticket. Naomi held their daughter tighter, whispering against her tiny forehead, "We're getting out, my love. We're getting out." And in that moment, the decision sharpened. They would abandon everything, names, history, lineage, comfort, to build a life stitched together with nothing but truth and grit. If you were in Naomi's place, would you trust a warning from a woman who once despised you? Let us know in the comments. And if you're still invested in their escape, hit the like button. It helps this story reach more people. They moved faster than fear. Min Jae worked through the nights, exchanging whispered messages with a broker who specialized in disappearing men with dangerous last names. He traded whatever cash he had left for new passports, new identities, and a battered sedan that smelled like old leather and anonymity. Yuna connected them with a trusted pilot who would fly them out under a quiet manifest when the timing was right. Every transaction felt like cutting ties with his old life, painful, necessary, and irreversible. On the day they left, the sky over Gyeongnam City was low and gray, the kind of weather that makes every goodbye feel cinematic and final. Naomi carried Naomi in a soft wrap, the baby's fingers clenched tight around her collarbone. Min Jae moved with an intensity that made his hands tremble. They had packed light, 2 suitcases, a handful of documents folded into a folder, and the weight of a decision that would shape everything to come. They reached the small airstrip before dawn. The pilot, a broad-shouldered man with quiet eyes, waited in the shadows of the plane, and for a sliver of a second Min Jae thought of all the people who would trade places with him for one more sunrise. Then he thought of Naomi's laugh, the way she argued in class, the stubborn fire in her that wouldn't let life be anything but honest. He stepped onto the plane, carrying her and the child like treasure. The flight was long and metallic, a suspended hush filled with the soft breaths of a sleeping baby and the tinny hum of the engine. Naomi slept against him, and when she stirred, he brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "We'll be okay, Naomi," he whispered as if he could will safety into being. When Macquarie's air greeted them, it was warm and loud and alive, noisy, chaotic, and saturated with the smells of frying plantain and spices that tugged at memories Naomi had kept folded away for years. The city felt like a bomb. People pressed past each other in the terminal with a familiarity that made Min Jae dizzy with relief. Here, no one recognized him. Here, his name was just a man's, not a banner or a verdict. They found a small apartment above a grocer, a place with a narrow balcony where laundry dried in strips and neighbors called down to one another across courtyards. It smelled of cassava and stew and something like belonging. Naomi's mother, who had been there weeks before to organize care while Naomi recovered, greeted them with a cry and a hug that made Min Jae want to fold himself into someone smaller, less conspicuous. He liked that his new family didn't measure him by his birth. The first months in Macquarie were a blur of small, ordinary miracles. Naomi learned to latch without oxygen tubes. Naomi walked without the constant fear that had shadowed her after the collapse. Min Jae learned to cook a simple stew Naomi adored and managed to burn it only once. They argued about tiny things, the arrangement of furniture, the price of diapers, whether to buy a second-hand car or use the money to advertise the consulting service. Those arguments were the kinds of quarrels that meant life had moved from crisis into the territory of living. Min Jae registered the business using his new identity. They called it Bridgepoint Consulting, a blunt, honest name that spoke to their purpose, connecting cultures, smoothing negotiations, teaching companies how to speak without trampling. Naomi designed a curriculum that blended language, cultural context, and the ethics of cross-border business. She wrote exercises that made executives uncomfortable, role plays where they learned how to apologize, how to listen, how to mean what they said. At first, clients came slowly. A small import-export firm needed help navigating payment terms with a Macquarie supplier. A boutique fashion house wanted advice on translating ad campaigns for a Nigerian audience. Each job felt like proof that they could do it, that their work mattered more than the ledger on a syndicate balance sheet. They celebrated the first contract with a cheap bottle of wine, opened at midnight after Naomi had finally settled. Naomi cried quietly into her hands. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it." "No," Min Jae corrected, smiling through the fatigue. "We did it." Bridgepoint's name spread by word of mouth. Naomi's old students in Gyeongnam, expats, teachers, traders, shared testimonials. CO Yuna, who had been their quiet anchor in the city, helped set up a webinar that drew a modest, enthusiastic crowd. Min Jae taught negotiation with a blunt vulnerability that disarmed clients, part confession, part instruction. "When you negotiate," he would say, "don't forget that a human sits at the other end. Culture is not an obstacle. It is a partner." Success was a slow burn. It came with nights where Min Jae lay awake, listening to the distant legal rumblings he knew would never stop. News he couldn't always silence, mentions of him in the fringe whisper networks, a photograph in an online rag that pictured someone who looked faintly like him at a Macquarie market. He'd glance toward the balcony and imagine a face peering up from the street below. One evening, as the business began to show a steady promise and their rent was paid for the month, Naomi received a message, a short note from a number she'd never seen. The words were deliberate, designed to unsettle. "We can find you anywhere." Naomi's hand tightened on her phone. She didn't show it immediately. Instead, she folded Naomi's onesie and hummed as if calming herself. When Min Jae came in, clothes smelling of the street and the low laughter of neighbors carrying groceries, she held up the note. He read it, then set the paper down calmly. "They'll try to scare us," he said. "They'll try to make us small. They said they could find us anywhere," Naomi said. "They could follow us. Hurt us." "They wouldn't," he said. "Halmini warned us, yes. But they won't spill blood here. It would be bad business for them." "What if they don't care about business?" Naomi asked, fear threading her voice. Min Jae sat beside her, pulling her close. "Then we'll fight back in other ways. We'll document everything. We'll move when we must. We'll be smarter." Their life was an exercise in vigilance, cameras on the shop street, neighbors who offered tips, Yuna who checked up on them at odd hours. Yet the ordinary joys persisted. Naomi learned to crawl, then walk, speaking a blend of Korean syllables and Makori phrases that made the neighbors laugh with delight. At the market, an old woman offered her a colorful wrapper and called her Little Princess, in the local dialect, and Naomi felt, for the first time since her collapse, the ground under her feet steady. Bridgepoint received a larger client, a multinational looking to partner with a textile cooperative in Makori. The contract was meaningful not just financially but symbolically. It was the kind of work that could reshape small communities, giving local artisans a direct route to a world that had once exploited them. Naomi poured herself into the project, coordinating calls that stitched together time zones, languages, and customs. Min Jae handled logistics, schmoozed with wary CEOs, apologized on behalf of the syndicate's shadow by being upfront about their newfound ethics. The project was a success. Shipment after shipment sold out, and with each sale came paychecks that were honest and weightless in their hands. They hired a receptionist at a modest wage, then a junior consultant from Naomi's class in Makori. Naomi grew confident, a child who giggled when she mixed Korean words into Makori songs. But peace had a way of fragility, like a pane of glass in an open window. One afternoon, a man came to the Bridgepoint office with a business proposal. He wore a suit that didn't sit well with the warm colors of the office, a suit that suggested money, and possibly more. He introduced himself as a facilitator for investors interested in African markets. His manner was superficially charming, but as he spoke, Min Jae noticed a careful omission, no specifics, no references, no follow-through on paperwork. He asked pointed questions about clients and methods. Later that night, Naomi found Min Jae staring at the city lights from the balcony, jaw tight. She joined him, and he showed her a photograph he'd taken from the doorway of the meeting room, the facilitator's sleeve with a small, familiar crest. It was a mark Min Jae recognized from his youth, the crest of someone who still had business with the Ryu syndicate. A chill settled into Naomi's bones. "They found us," she whispered. "We knew they would," he said. "But they can't touch us here. Not without making enemies." Naomi pressed her forehead to his chest. "They won't stop." "No," he said. "But neither will we. If you're holding your breath for them, smash that like button and tell us in the comments what you think they should do next, fight, hide, or confront." They learned the hard way that escape didn't mean safety. It meant a different kind of fight. The man with the suit returned the following week, this time accompanied by two others who lingered in the doorway of Bridgepoint as if they belonged there. Their smiles were practiced like stage props. The receptionist, a young woman with quick hands and quicker instincts, watched them with a caution that made Naomi's chest tighten. "We're interested in an investment," the man said, voice oily. "We can scale your operations. We can make Bridgepoint a household name." Min Jae greeted them politely, letting Naomi take the lead on the pitch. She moved through her slides with quiet authority, articulating values and strategy with steady clarity. The man asked soft, probing questions that left no paper trail. He complimented her ethics and then, with a casualness meant to unsettle, asked where their clients were based. "Mostly local and cross-border with small firms," Naomi said. "We emphasize trust building and fair practices." The man's smile widened. "Expanding into other markets requires capital and protection. We can introduce you to partners who ensure both." Min Jae felt the room ice over. He excused himself to the bathroom and dialed Yuna. A few whispered words later, Yuna called back, urgency threaded through her voice. "If they're offering protection, they're connected to people who buy protection with fear, not goodwill. Keep them away." Min Jae returned and closed the meeting politely. The man left a business card that felt like a ledger of menace, no company name, only a phone number and a stylized crest that Min Jae recognized with a cold shake of the head. He hadn't expected to see the mark again so soon. That night, someone slashed the tires of Bridgepoint's delivery van. The receptionist found it early, pressing the tire with disbelief as if the rubber itself had been a test sheet failed. A threatening note taped to the windshield read, "Leave now." They reported it, of course. The local police took a report and shrugged. Small businesses face petty crime all the time. But Min-jae knew petty crime was not always petty. It often carried a hand with a longer reach. Naomi sank into a chair in their cramped living room, Naomi asleep in a sling against her chest. "Why can't they let us live?" she whispered. "What do they want from us that we don't already have?" "What they want is control," Min-jae said. "They want to remind me what I once promised. They want to show me what I threw away." "You already threw away their respect," Naomi said. "Why keep answering the phone?" "Because answers matter," he said. "Because I promised to keep you safe, and sometimes keeping you safe means knowing who's at the door." She pressed her forehead to his shoulder. "And if they stop at slashing tires? What happens if they go further?" "We'll adapt," he told her softly. "We'll move offices. We'll change routes. We'll document everything. And if it ever comes to it, we'll go louder. We won't be intimidated into silence." She exhaled and let the tension pool in her body. "I don't want our child to grow up under that shadow." "Then we'll make sure she doesn't," he said. "We'll show her a life built on things stronger than fear." They doubled down on community ties. Naomi organized free workshops at local community centers. Bridgepoint's recommendations for ethical sourcing became their signature. The textile cooperative that had been their first major win became a vocal supporter, sending letters praising Bridgepoint's integrity and the lives their contracts had improved. A group of market traders who sold their goods internationally posted a simple petition online in support of a small firm that helped local artisans grow. The story gained traction in unlikely corners, diaspora blogs, small business columns, a human interest segment on a regional morning show. Public support made direct violence costlier. But public sympathy could be a double-edged sword. Exposure made them visible in ways their enemies could exploit. A smear appeared in an online tabloid, a fabricated piece suggesting Bridgepoint laundered money for suspicious clients. It spread, people questioned their credibility, and one of their smaller clients backed out, citing reputational risk. The blows stung. Naomi cried alone in the bathroom that night, a quick, sharp surrender to exhaustion. Min-jae found her with a towel around her shoulders and held her close until her breaths matched his. "We're doing important work," he said. "This is a test. We rebuild trust by being honest louder than they are loud with lies." She nodded, fatigue in every blink. "I know. Sometimes I wonder if I should have left it all behind before any of this began." "Would you have?" he asked. She thought of the first time she'd seen him argue with a client, the stubborn tenderness he showed the first night she'd been in the hospital. She thought of Naomi's small fingers wrapped around her own. "No," she said. "I wouldn't trade this for anything." Min-jae arranged meetings with attorneys and local journalists willing to look deeper into the tabloid's claims. They pushed back with evidence, testimonials, bank statements that were messier than the syndicate's clean ledgers but unmistakably legal. Slowly, the smear lost momentum. The cooperative posted a video testimonial. The morning show did a follow-up piece, neutral and factual, but it tilted public perception back toward curiosity rather than suspicion. Even so, the invisible tension never fully eased. Late one evening, Min-jae received a call from an unknown number. A voice he'd heard once before, cool, practiced, said only, "We can make this stop." "What do you want?" he asked. Silence, then a single sentence, "You know what? Come back." "No," Min-jae said. "Not a chance." The line went dead. His heart thundered, but his resolve was steady. He had chosen. He began to teach more publicly, combining Naomi's curriculum with his own experiences. He spoke on panels about ethical engagement and the human cost of corporate greed. Naomi led community classes on cross-cultural communication, teaching small business owners how to negotiate without condescension. Bridgepoint's work started changing real behaviors. Suppliers paid fairer prices. Korean buyers learned to ask questions instead of issuing demands. And as they fought the slow war of legitimacy, something else happened that neither of them expected. Forgiveness arrived in small parcels. Grandmother Ryu, Halmiani, sent a letter. Not a formal business letter, a short, handwritten note folded until it was the size of a small prayer. Naive as it might be, the gesture landed like a warm stone in still water. Halmiani wrote of memory and mistake, of seeing strength in Min-jae's choice, and of a hope that blood might be thicker than pride. She didn't attempt to undo the rupture, she offered a bridge. Naomi carried the letter with her to the market, sliding it into a dairy stack to hide tears that surprised her with their intensity. Min-jae read it late at night and felt something heavy and old loosen just enough to breathe. Time, for once, was an ally. Jean Naomi grew, toddler feet padding across their small apartment, her laugh a ribbon that cut through anxiety. The regular hum of life, the cheap victories and quiet defeats, wore down the edges of fear. Bridgepoint stabilized. Clients returned. The world's focus flickered elsewhere. Then, after a season of small victories, the syndicate made one last move, an invitation, innocuous and formal, to a philanthropic summit in Jiangnam City. It arrived on crisp paper, embossed with a crest Min Jae recognized like an ache. Madame Ryu's emissary wrote, "We realize mistakes were made on both sides. Perhaps there is room for dialogue. Come. Speak on community engagement." Naomi looked at the invitation and then at Min Jae. "Do we go?" His jaw clenched. He could smell compromise like rain before a storm. But there was also an opportunity, to stand on a public stage and make the values they'd built impossible to ignore. "We go," he said. "But we go together. No apologies for truth. No deals for silence." Naomi nodded. "We'll go and tell the truth." He kissed her, then lifted Jean Naomi into his arms. "We'll go as a family. If you think that stepping back into the lion's den is brave or reckless, drop a comment. Would you face your past to protect your future, or would you find a way to fight from the shadows? And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on stories like this." The summit in Jiangnam City was held at a gleaming cultural center overlooking the river, a place designed to impress foreign investors, decorated with polished stone floors, towering screens, and floral arrangements that looked more expensive than an apartment in Macquarie. It was the kind of venue where powerful men exchanged calculated smiles, where alliances were born over champagne and veiled threats. Naomi adjusted the wrap around Jean Naomi as they stepped into the building. The baby, now toddling with sure, steady feet, clung to her mother's leg and stared at the bustling room with wide, curious eyes. "Stay close," Min Jae murmured, touching Naomi's back lightly. He wore a simple charcoal suit, clean lines, no trace of the syndicate's old arrogance. He walked beside Naomi as an equal, not as an heir. They had rehearsed their speech, their boundaries, every possible manipulation that might come their way. But the moment they entered the summit hall, Min Jae felt a familiar sensation, like a net dropping from the ceiling, settling over him. People turned, whispers darting through the room. They pretended not to stare, but their glances were sharp, assessing. A hostess approached with a bow that was too stiff. "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs.," she asked hesitantly, the new last name catching on her tongue. "Kim," Min Jae answered smoothly. "Kim and Adeyemi." The woman's eyes flickered, recognizing him despite the alias. She nodded and gestured for them to follow her to the VIP floor. From the balcony above, Madame Ryu watched. Her posture was elegant, commanding, but something about her expression flickered, an exhaustion, perhaps, woven into the steel. Naomi swallowed hard. "She's here." "I know," Min Jae said softly. "Let her watch." They were led to seats near the stage. Bridgepoint's logo appeared alongside those of global corporations and local nonprofits. It stunned Naomi briefly, how far their small company had come. Just 2 years ago, she had been lying in a hospital bed, fighting for breath. Now she stood in a room of powerful leaders, not as a hidden lover or a burden, but as a CEO with a voice worth hearing. Before the speeches began, the room buzzed with networking and introductions. A few officials greeted them politely, some warmly, people who admired their work, or at least respected the buzz around Bridgepoint. But others looked at Naomi and Jean Naomi with thinly veiled disdain, as if their presence disrupted a picture they believed they owned. One man in particular, a polished executive with a smug half-smile, approached them with 2 flanking assistants. He bowed to Min Jae and said, "It's been a long time since we've seen you at an event like this. Your disappearance was quite dramatic." "My life improved," Min Jae said blandly. The man chuckled. "So I've heard. And this must be your wife. And your daughter." He leaned slightly toward the child, who shrank behind Naomi. "Quite unexpected, given your upbringing." Naomi straightened, voice calm but firm. "Unexpected doesn't mean unwanted." The man blinked, caught off guard. "Of course. Of course. Well, I look forward to hearing your talk. I'm sure it will be enlightening." He walked away, leaving a faint trail of condescension in his wake. Naomi exhaled. "I hate rooms like this." "So do I," Min Jae murmured. "That's why we're here. To end whatever hold this world thinks it still has on us." When the keynote sessions began, the room darkened, and the stage lit with a soft blue glow. Industry leaders talked about ethical business, cross-border cooperation, community engagement. Their words were polished, heavily edited, and safe. Then the MC called, "Next, we welcome Bridgepoint Consulting, represented by Naomi Adeyemi and Kim Jin-ho." It took everything in Naomi not to stiffen at the alias, but she lifted her chin, took Min Jae's hand, and walked onto the stage. The audience quieted. She began softly, her voice steady. "When we started our firm, we had nothing. Not wealth. Not connections. Not even safety. All we had was a belief that business can build bridges instead of borders." Her words flowed gently at first, then sharpened with truth. She talked about cultural humility, the dangers of arrogance in international negotiations, and the beauty of learning how to listen. People nodded. Some leaned forward. Cameras clicked. Then she shifted. "And we learned something else," she said. "When you reject a life built on fear, you discover a different kind of wealth, a wealth rooted in honesty, in the courage to start again." A hush fell through the room. Min Jae stepped beside her, taking the microphone. "For years," he said, "I served a world that believed power justified anything. Silence. Secrets. Sacrifice. I believed that love could exist in the shadows and still remain whole." He paused, scanning the room, catching the eyes of men he once bowed to. "But love cannot survive in secrecy. It demands truth. And truth demands sacrifice." Someone in the audience murmured. Another shifted uncomfortably. "My daughter," he continued, "was born into a world where people wanted her silence before she ever took her first breath. My wife nearly died because I lacked the courage to choose her openly. I carry that shame. But I also carry this." He gestured toward Naomi and toward the small child seated now in a front row chair. "The knowledge that when you finally choose the right thing, even late, courage becomes easier." A ripple of emotion moved through the hall. Cameras zoomed in. Some faces softened. Others hardened, especially among the syndicate allies. Min Jae looked directly at Madame Ryu. For the first time in his life, he didn't look away. "Our company bridges cultures," he said. "But today, we bridge something else. The divide between what we were and what we choose to be. Every day, we choose freedom." The applause began soft, scattered, unsure. Then it grew. Naomi squeezed his hand, tears brightening her eyes. After the session ended, people approached them, some warmly, some hesitantly. But the real moment happened when Madame Ryu descended the balcony stairs and approached with halting steps. Her gaze was on Jean Naomi. She stopped in front of the child, who stared back with the guarded curiosity children reserve for strangers. Madame Ryu spoke first. "She resembles you," she murmured to Naomi. Naomi blinked, surprised. "Thank you." The older woman's eyes moved to Min Jae. "Your father is dying." Time froze. Min Jae inhaled slowly. "When?" "Soon," she said. "He has one request." Naomi placed a stabilizing hand on her husband's arm. "What request?" Min Jae asked. "He wants to meet your daughter," Madame Ryu said. "And he wants to apologize." Silence pressed around them, thick as fog. Naomi met Min Jae's eyes, questioning, wary, compassionate. And for a moment, the weight of years bore down on him like a closing door. "If you were in Min Jae's place, would you let your dying father back into your life after everything he did? Tell us in the comments. Your choices shape how you see this story. And if you're still here with them, hit like and subscribe." Madame Ryu's words hung in the air like a challenge and a benediction at once. Min Jae felt the floor tilt beneath him, his father's impending death, the possibility of an apology. A part of him wanted to say no outright, to slam the door on a past that had tried to shape every breath he'd taken. Another part, quieter, stubborn, wanted to know if there could be a genuine end to that chapter, if forgiveness might soften more than hatred ever could. Naomi watched him, eyes searching his face. "What do you want to do?" she asked, voice small but steady. He thought of the boy he'd been, eager for his family's approval, hungry for a place that mattered. He thought of the man he'd become, worn, chosen, committed to a tiny daughter who mixed 2 languages before she even knew what family names meant. "I'll meet him," he said finally. "Not to fix what can't be fixed. But to close a circle. To know." Madame Ryu nodded, expression unreadable. "He will be in a private room at a local clinic. He asked for no fanfare. He asked for you." They arranged it for the next morning. Min Jae didn't sleep much that night. Memories like small knives kept waking him. Naomi sat up beside him in their small hotel room. Naomi curled between them, breathing softly. "If you go," she said, "go with your eyes open." "I will," he promised. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and lilies. Machines ticked in patient rooms like timekeepers. Min Jae entered with Naomi by his side, the corridor strangely quiet. He found the room easily. The door was half open. Inside, Ryu's Sang-ho lay propped on pillows, the lines of his face softer, the hardness mostly gone. He looked small in a way Min-jae had never before seen, less an emperor than a man bewildered by his own mortality. The father's eyes fixed on Min-jae with an intensity that was almost childlike. The old arrogance softened into something fragile. "My son," he whispered, voice coarse. Min-jae moved toward him, every instinct clashing. He had rehearsed questions and accusations and a cold, unbending refusal. Instead, he felt words like pebbles in his mouth, heavy and unnecessary. "Father," he said simply. Sang-ho coughed, pain folding his features. Naomi stood quietly at Min-jae's shoulder, Naomi watching with innocent curiosity from her carrier. The father's gaze flicked to the child, then back, like a man seeing color for the first time. "I heard, you have a daughter," Sang-ho said, voice thin. "A granddaughter." His voice carried the surprise of someone noticing sunlight after a life of dark rooms. "She's Naomi," Min-jae said. "She's small and stubborn." Sang-ho let out a dry laugh, then a pained sigh. "Stubbornness is good. Good for survival." He coughed again, then turned to Naomi, eyes narrowing with effort. "You. Adeyemi." The name sounded foreign in his throat but correct. "You kept my son safe." Naomi inclined her head. "I nearly died." He closed his eyes briefly, breathing hard. "I heard. I was told many things. I was told you were a problem. I was told my son would lose everything." He glanced at Min-jae. "I was wrong. I was a fool." Tears stung Min-jae's eyes, but he choked them back. The urge to lash out at years of harm, at the coldness that had guided many of Sang-ho's decisions, was enormous. Yet here was a man reduced to a patient, asking for something he hadn't found the language for until it was almost too late. "Why now?" Min-jae asked, voice trembling with a mix of anger and aching hope. Sang-ho's hand fluttered like a moth and landed on Min-jae's forearm. "Regret is loud at the end," he said softly. "But I want to see her." Before, he couldn't finish. Min-jae looked at Naomi. She met his eyes and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, an invitation to choose, not for him but for the child between them. He stepped closer and lifted Naomi from her carrier, cradling her like the small, miraculous thing she was. He positioned her in front of Sang-ho. The old man's eyes glistened as he reached out with a tremor to touch the child's cheek. For a moment, all the power plays and cold deals and nights of hunger for approval fell away. A dying man's fingers brushed his granddaughter's skin, and there was nothing left to script. Sang-ho's lips trembled. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice breaking. "For everything." It was not a cure. It was not absolution. But it was more than Min-jae had expected. Tears he had held back for months broke loose, hot and unsteady. "I forgive you," he whispered, not because the hurt vanished, but because he didn't want to hand his child a legacy of anger to carry before she could choose her own. Naomi stood still, the child asleep in her arms, and watched the exchange between two flawed men unravel into something that looked like mercy. Sang-ho's chest expanded with a shuddering breath, relief and sorrow mingled into a small, human sound. They left the clinic with an uneasy quiet between them, a silence that was not entirely peace but had room in it for the beginnings of something softer. Outside, the daylight felt strange, like a bridge they'd crossed into a different terrain. Back at their hotel, Min-jae exhaled in a way he hadn't allowed himself. "It's done," he said. "I don't know what it means forever, but it's done." Naomi sat on the edge of the bed. Naomi gnawed on a soft toy, content. "You did more than I expected," she said. "For you, for her." "I did it for us," he corrected. "For this," he gestured at the small sleeping child, at the woman who had defied oceans for a future none of them had guaranteed. "For a life I can build without the chains of the past. But nothing's over. They'll push back." "They always do," Naomi said. "But we've learned how to live under pressure. We have partners now. We have communities." They resumed the rhythm of their days with a new steadiness. Bridgepoint's reputation grew in circles that mattered, NGOs, ethical importers, and a few bold corporations eager for authentic engagement. Naomi's talks were in demand, Min-jae's blunt honesty drew curious crowds. Each public success was a small shield against the shadowy threats that still whispered on the edges of their life. And yet, as the months rolled into a year, the past refused to be entirely exorcised. There were nights when a sleek car idled outside their apartment, when a stranger's gaze lingered too long, when an anonymous package arrived containing nothing but a photograph of Min-jae in his old life, a reminder of what they'd left behind. The family, what remained of it, continued to fracture. Some relatives reached out privately with cautious olive branches, Others sealed off contact entirely. Madame Ryu remained an enigma, sometimes cold and punitive, sometimes soft with the surprising warmth of Halmiani's influence. Halmiani herself visited once, briefly, her presence as solid as a vow. Years marked themselves not by grand events but by the small certainties. Naomi's first word, a blend of two cultures, Naomi's laugh growing easier, Bridgepoint's modest office filled with staff who believed in a mission bigger than profits. They found grace in the mundanity of bills and baby toys, in late-night lectures Min Jae gave on empathy and negotiation, in long conversations that stitched together their differences. Then, on a rainy afternoon in Macquarie, a simple package arrived at their office. Inside was a worn photograph of Halmiani, slender and smiling in a way Min Jae had never seen her smile, relieved, perhaps, or proud. A note on the back read, in a careful hand, "For new beginnings. Keep building." Naomi pressed the photograph to her chest. Min Jae took it from her and placed it on his desk, a small shrine to the complicated family that had both wounded and, strangely, saved them. They had built something far from perfect, a life trimmed of opulence but rich with choices. It wasn't safe from scars, but the cracks had become windows. They filled those windows with laughter, with the stubborn, ordinary love of people who'd chosen each other in full knowledge of the cost. Tell us in the comments, would you accept an apology from someone who hurt you if it meant peace for your child? They measured time in small, ordinary certainties now. Diapers folded, invoices paid, a child's first stubborn words that mixed Korean consonants with Macquarie cadence. Bridgepoint grew not with fireworks but with steady, deliberate steps, a new client in Accra, a featured column in a respected diaspora magazine, a classroom full of executives who left humbled by Naomi's blunt insistence that respect was not negotiable. The life they had carved out was not safe from the past, but it was a life of their own making, and that made the difference. Then the call came on a damp morning when the sky over Macquarie was a uniform sheet of gray. Min Jae answered with the cautious optimism he'd taught himself to keep in reserve. The voice on the other end was short and brittle. "It's time," Halmiani said. "He doesn't have much." He felt the old world rearrange itself in an instant. Memories, sharp and raw, came forward, the wedding aisle he'd fled, the hospital corridor where he'd waited for Naomi's operation, the days he'd spent learning to be small and brave. He thought of Sang-ho's apology, terse and late, and how it had opened something like air. He thought too of grandmother Ryu's steady presence, the surprising benediction she'd offered him when he needed it most. Naomi stood beside him, a hand on his arm, and Naomi tugged at his sleeve with a question in her eyes that was already learning to weigh adults' words. Is he the same man?" she asked in a child's bluntness. "He's old," Naomi said simply. "Maybe he's learning." They flew back to Gyeongnam City on a short flight that felt heavier than any of their trips home. The syndicate compound was a strange, familiar landscape. Marble that had once meant status now gleamed with a history Min Jae no longer wanted. They entered a private room where Sang-ho lay, smaller than Min Jae remembered, the power lines of his face softened by fever. He looked up when they came in, eyes registering surprise and then something that might have been shame. "You came," he rasped. Min Jae sat, the years of anger and distance folded into a simple, hard edge that was neither forgiveness nor vengeance. He held Naomi in his arms for Sang-ho to see. The old man's gaze lingered on the child, on the small, stubborn fists, and then turned to Naomi, recognition finally finding a way into his throat. Sang-ho tried to form words, and what came out was not a plea for power but a small, clumsy attempt at humanity. "I was wrong," he said. "I hurt you. I hurt him. His voice failed, but the meaning landed. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was enough to begin a different conversation. Min Jae thought of all the ways his father's world had tried to consume everything good around it, how it had taught him silence and compromise. He thought of the sharp, terrible cost of living without truth. He thought, too, of the promise he'd made in a hospital corridor, to protect the small life he'd helped create, to be present, to be honest. He leaned forward and placed Naomi's tiny hand in Sang-ho's trembling palm. "Thank you for saying it," he said. "We'll live with the rest." Sang-ho's eyes closed for a long time. When they opened again, there was something like relief in them, and then, quietly, he was gone. The funeral was small, lacking the pomp of leadership ceremonies, pared down by Halmiani's wishes. In the months that followed, the Ryu family's hold loosened further, not because wounds fully healed but because the machinery of them lost some of its momentum. Some relatives offered cautious olive branches, others retreated into old, brittle certainty. Halmiani remained a tempering presence until she too passed within a year, quietly, at home, leaving behind a letter and a photograph Min Jae kept on his desk as a reminder that even monstrous systems could be softened by single kind acts. Life in Macquarie continued, threaded now with these new losses and new gains. They married in a small ceremony on the roof of their building, beneath strings of lights and the warm song of neighbors who had become family. No syndicate parades, no sponsored banquets, Just old women from the market who danced with Naomi, neighbors who brought stews, and Yuna who stood at their side like a sister. Min-jae wore a suit that fit without arrogance. Naomi wore a dress that folded around her like joy. Naomi, in a tiny wrapper, clapped and tried to blow out the single candle the neighbors fussed over. Bridgepoint expanded slowly, opening a second office in Accra and hiring local consultants who had once been clients. Naomi's training modules became part of university programs. Min-jae sat on panels and sometimes, when the room was right, he told the brutal truth about his past, how silence had cost him almost everything, how cowardice had threatened the woman he loved, how choosing truth had felt like jumping off a cliff and discovering a firm, if humble, ground. Naomi grew, an effortless bridge between two worlds. She sang Korai lullabies her mother taught her with a cadence that echoed Makori drums. At school she corrected teachers who mispronounced African names. In the market she soaked in the rhythm of vendors with a curiosity that made people smile. She learned to oscillate between languages as if switching between costumes, each one adding to who she was rather than subtracting. Years layered themselves into a life that was less dramatic but more honest. They had moments of fear, an anonymous threat here, a smear article there, but they met them with community power, legal recourse, and stubborn visibility. Their enemies found that intimidation cost too much when public sentiment could swing against them. One evening, standing on the balcony that had grown from a cramped porch into a little island of green and laundry and neighborly calls, Min-jae and Naomi watched Naomi play with a group of children from the street. She was teaching them a Korean counting rhyme while explaining how to negotiate for the fairest price on beads. The children hunched, focused, small faces serious as they learned. Min-jae wrapped an arm around Naomi and pulled her close. "We made it," he said, though the words felt fragile. They had not arrived in any grand sense, but they had built a world where truth outshone the old currency of power. Naomi leaned her head against him, chin on his shoulder. "We built it badly, lovingly, and stubbornly," she said. "And it's ours." He kissed the top of her head. "That's enough." A final note, because stories live as much in the telling as in the ending, choices matter. Ryu Min-jae's pain came from choosing safety over love, silence over truth. His growth came from the opposite, the terrifying act of choosing love openly, of rebuilding on unstable ground. The cost was high, disinheritance, exile, threats, but the return was irreplaceable, a life he could claim, a daughter who would not carry his silence as a burden, a love that learned to breathe. If this story moved you, if you believe in choosing love over legacy, or if you think the world is better with the tough choices made visible, drop a comment below. Tell us, what would you have done if the past knocked on your wedding day? Like this video if you felt Naomi's small hands tug at your heart, share it with someone who loves a story about courage, and subscribe for more Afro-Korean tales where culture, crime, and courage collide. Your voice keeps stories like this alive.